The sky stretched endlessly over the Arizona territory, and beneath it, Belinda Lawson's hands were stained with blood from a mourning dove that had flown straight into her kitchen window that morning in the summer of 1881. She cradled the small creature in her apron, whispering soft reassurances, as she walked carefully back toward her modest homestead just outside Casa Grande. The bird's wing sat at an odd angle, clearly broken, but its heart still beat rapidly against her palm. This was the third bird this week, and Belinda was starting to wonder if the universe was sending her companions to fill the vast emptiness that had settled into her bones since her father passed 6 months ago. The homestead was quiet now. Too quiet. Her father had been a talker, always filling the silence with stories of his younger days or observations about the weather or predictions about the cattle market. Now, there was only wind, the occasional call of a hawk, and the creaking of the fence posts that desperately needed mending. Belinda had tried to fix them herself twice now, but each time the wire had snapped back and caught her hands, leaving angry red welts across her palms. She had finally given up, letting the fence sag more with each passing day. She settled onto the porch steps, her apron creating a small nest for the injured dove. With gentle fingers, she examined the wing. The break was clean, at least. She had learned this past week how to fashion tiny splints from matchsticks and strips of cloth. Her collection of recovering birds had taken over the spare bedroom, a room that once belonged to her father, but now housed a makeshift aviary of the wounded and healing. "You will be all right," she told the dove, though she was not entirely sure if she was speaking to the bird or herself. The sound of hoofbeats made her look up. A rider was approaching from the east, silhouetted against the afternoon sun. Belinda tensed. Living alone had made her wary of strangers, though most folks in these parts were decent enough. As the rider drew closer, she could make out more details. A man, tall in the saddle, wearing a worn hat and dusty clothes that suggested he had been traveling. A cowboy by the looks of him. He slowed his horse as he approached, raising one hand in greeting. "Afternoon, madam," he called out, his voice carrying easily across the dry air. Belinda stood carefully, keeping the dove secure in her apron. "Afternoon," she replied, her voice cautious. The cowboy dismounted with easy grace, and she could see his face now. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of strong coffee. A few days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw, and dust coated his boots and the lower half of his trousers. "Name's Dalton Jenkins," he said, removing his hat respectfully. "I am looking for work, and someone in town mentioned there might be a homestead out this way that could use a hand." Belinda blinked in surprise. She had not told anyone in Casa Grande that she needed help. Pride had kept her from admitting that she could not manage the property alone. "Who told you that?" "The general store keeper, Mr. Morrison. Said he noticed you have not been buying as much wire as your father used to, and figured you might be having trouble with maintenance." Dalton shifted his weight, and she noticed he was trying very hard not to stare at her apron, where the dove's head was now peeking out. "I do not have much money for hired hands," Belinda said honestly. "My father left the property free and clear, but not much in the way of savings." "Well, I am not looking for much," Dalton said. "Just honest work, 3 meals a day and a place to bed down. I can sleep in the barn if you have got one." Belinda studied him carefully. There was something open and genuine about his face, something that reminded her of her father's honesty. And Lord knew she needed help. The fence was only the beginning. The roof leaked in 2 places. The well pump was making concerning noises, and she had been putting off culling the vegetable garden because it had become so overgrown it was overwhelming. "What happened to your bird?" Dalton asked, nodding toward her apron. "Flew into my window," Belinda said. Broke its wing. I am going to splint it. Something shifted in Dalton's expression, a softness entering his eyes. My mother used to do that, he said quietly. Rescue injured critters. Drove my father crazy, having half-wild animals healing up in the house. Where is your mother now? Belinda asked, then immediately regretted the question when she saw the shadow cross his face. Cholera took her 3 years back, he said simply. My father followed 6 months later. Could not live without her, I think, just gave up. They stood in silence for a moment, two orphans recognizing each other across the dusty yard. The fence, Belinda finally said. It needs mending badly. The cattle have been getting into the neighbor's property, and I am worried they will find me or worse. Dalton's face brightened. I can start on that right now if you would like. Still got a few good hours of daylight left. Do not you want to rest first? You look like you have been riding for days. For days, he admitted. But I would rather be useful. Sitting still makes me restless. Belinda felt something warm unfurl in her chest, something she had not felt in months. Hope, maybe, or just relief at not being alone. There is wire and tools in the shed, she said. It is the small building behind the house. And the fence that needs the most work is the eastern boundary, where it runs along the creek bed. Dalton settled his hat back on his head and smiled. It was a good smile, Belinda thought, genuine and reaching his eyes. I will get right on it. And madam, if you do not mind my saying, you have got a whole lot of fence that needs attention. Might take me a few days. Call me Belinda, she said, and take however long you need. She watched him lead his horse toward the shed, noting the way he moved with quiet confidence, the way he patted his horse's neck affectionately before tying it in the shade. Then she looked down at the dove in her apron and whispered, Maybe our luck is changing. Inside, she set up the dove in a small crate lined with soft cloth, carefully splinting the wing as she had done with the others. The bird protested weakly but eventually settled, exhausted from pain and shock. She placed the crate near the window where the morning light would warm it, then washed her hands and started preparing supper. As she worked, she found herself glancing out the window toward the eastern fence line. She could see Dalton in the distance, already hard at work. He had removed his shirt in the heat, and even from this distance, she could see the play of muscles across his back as he stretched wire and hammered posts. She looked away quickly, feeling her cheeks warm. It had been a long time since she had thought about a man in any way beyond practical necessity. There had been a boy once, before her mother died when Belinda was 15. A merchant's son from Tucson who had courted her properly, with flowers and Sunday walks. But her mother's death had changed everything. Her father had needed her, and the merchant's son had eventually married someone else. Since then, there had been no time, no energy, no desire for romance. Survival had been enough. But now, at 23, living alone on a failing homestead with only injured birds for company, Belinda was beginning to understand loneliness in a way she never had before. It was not just the absence of people. It was the absence of purpose, of connection, of someone to care whether you made it through another day. She made a simple supper of beans, cornbread, and the last of the dried beef. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, she stepped out onto the porch and rang the dinner bell her father had installed years ago. In the distance, she saw Dalton straighten, wipe his brow, and begin walking back toward the house. He had his shirt back on when he reached the porch, though it was unbuttoned and hanging loose. "Smells good," he said, genuine appreciation in his voice. "It is nothing fancy," Belinda warned, "just basic fare. Basic sounds like heaven right about now. I have been eating my own cooking for 4 days, and I am the first to admit I am terrible at it." She led him inside, suddenly conscious of how sparse her home must look. The furniture was old but well-maintained, the floors clean but worn. Her father's chair still sat by the fireplace, empty and waiting. She had not been able to bring herself to move it. Dalton washed up at the basin, scrubbing the dirt from his hands and face, then joined her at the small table. He waited until she sat before taking his own seat, a courtesy that made her think well of his upbringing. They ate in silence for a few minutes before Dalton spoke. "I fixed about half the eastern fence," he said. "The posts were rotted clean through in some places. I will need to replace them entirely, which will take longer, but it will hold properly when I am done." "I appreciate it," Belinda said. "I tried to fix it myself, but the wire kept snapping back. I was afraid I would put an eye out." "Wire is mean stuff if you do not know how to handle it," Dalton agreed. "My father taught me young, made me practice until I could string a fence line blindfolded." He paused, then added, "I noticed you have got other things that need attention too. The barn door is hanging crooked and some of your roof shingles are loose." Belinda felt a flush of embarrassment. "I know. It has been hard to keep up with everything since my father passed." "When did he die?" Dalton asked gently. 6 months ago. Heart just gave out one morning." "He went peacefully, at least." She pushed beans around her plate. "He built this place with my mother back when Arizona was even wilder than it is now. After she died, he kept it running for me, always said it would be mine someday. I just did not think someday would come so soon." "How old are you, if you do not mind my asking?" 23. Old enough to inherit property, apparently, but maybe not old enough to run it properly. Dalton shook his head. "Age has nothing to do with it. Running a homestead alone is hard for anyone. My parents did it together and they still struggled. I cannot imagine trying to do it solo." "What brought you to Casa Grande?" Belinda asked, wanting to shift the conversation away from her own inadequacies. "Wandering, mostly," Dalton admitted. "After my folks died, I sold the family place in New Mexico. Could not stand being there without them. Figured I would travel, see some country, find a place that felt right." He looked around the simple kitchen and something in his expression softened. "This feels right." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning neither of them was quite ready to acknowledge. After supper, Belinda showed Dalton to the barn where he could bed down. She had half expected him to argue for the bunkhouse, which was closer to the main house, but he seemed content with the barn. He made a comfortable nest in the hayloft, spreading his bedroll over fresh hay. "Thank you for the meal," he said as she turned to leave. "And for taking a chance on a stranger." "Thank you for stopping," Belinda replied. "I think maybe Mr. Morrison was right. I did need help." That night, lying in her own bed, Belinda listened to the sounds of the homestead. For the first time in months, those sounds did not feel lonely. Somewhere in the barn, Dalton was sleeping. The fence was being mended. The birds were healing in their crates. Small things, maybe, but they felt like the beginning of something larger. The next morning, Belinda woke before dawn, as was her habit. She dressed quickly and went to check on her birds. The dove from yesterday was alert, its eyes bright. The sparrow from 3 days ago was already trying to flutter its splinted wing. The mockingbird from a week ago was nearly healed, ready to be released soon. She fed them carefully, giving each bird water and the appropriate seeds or insects. Then she headed to the kitchen to start breakfast. She was mixing batter for flapjacks when she heard the barn door open and saw Dalton emerge, stretching in the early morning light. He spotted her watching from the window and waved. She waved back, feeling unaccountably shy. Breakfast was flapjacks with honey and strong coffee. Dalton ate like a man who had been doing hard labor, which he had, and Belinda found herself pleased to cook for someone who appreciated it. Her father had always been a good eater, but toward the end, his appetite had waned. It felt good to see someone enjoy her cooking again. "I was thinking," Dalton said as he finished his third flapjack, "after I finish the eastern fence, I should probably work my way around the whole property. Make sure everything is secure. Should not take more than a week or so if the weather holds." "That would be wonderful," Belinda said, "but I feel like I am taking advantage. I cannot pay you much." "You are feeding me better than I have eaten in months and giving me a place to sleep," Dalton said. "That is payment enough. Besides, I like the work, like feeling useful." After breakfast, Dalton headed back to the fence line while Belinda tackled the vegetable garden. The morning was already growing warm, promising a hot afternoon. She worked methodically, pulling weeds and examining plants for damage. The tomatoes were doing well, at least, and the squash was producing. She would need to consume, put up food for winter. She was so focused on her work that she did not hear Dalton approach until he spoke. "Found something you should see." She looked up, shading her eyes against the sun. He was holding something carefully in his hands. "What is it?" "Baby rabbit. Looks like a coyote got the mother. Found it near the fence line and the poor thing is half starved." Belinda stood immediately, wiping her hands on her apron. The rabbit was tiny, barely old enough to have fur. Its eyes were still closed. "Bring it inside," she said. "I will see what I can do." In the kitchen, she examined the rabbit carefully. It was dehydrated and weak, but alive. She had never tried to raise a rabbit before, but she knew they needed milk. Cow's milk would have to do, thinned with water and given with an eyedropper. Dalton watched as she worked, his expression intent. "You are good at this," he observed. "I have had practice lately," Belinda said. "Though mostly with birds, rabbits are new territory." "Why do you do it?" he asked. "The rescuing, I mean." Belinda paused, considering the question. "Because they need help and I can give it. Because when my mother died, I felt helpless. I could not save her, but maybe I can save them." The honesty of her answer seemed to strike something in Dalton. He was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "I understand that. After my parents died, I could not stop moving, could not stop working. Like if I just kept busy enough, I would not have to feel it." "Does it work?" Belinda asked. "No," Dalton admitted, "but it helps." They looked at each other across the kitchen table, the tiny rabbit between them, and Belinda felt a connection forming that had nothing to do with fences or homesteads. This was something deeper, a recognition of shared pain and the different ways they had learned to cope with it. Over the next few days, they fell into a rhythm. Dalton worked on the fence during the daylight hours while Belinda tended to the garden, the house, and her growing menagerie of recovering creatures. They ate meals together, conversation flowing more easily each day. Dalton told her about growing up in New Mexico, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about his mother's laugh and his father's stubborn pride. Belinda shared memories of her own childhood, of her mother's gentle hands and her father's unwavering strength. The rabbit survived, growing stronger each day. Belinda named it Cotton for its white fur, and it slept in a box lined with soft cloth near the stove. The birds continued to heal. She released the mockingbird on the 4th day of Dalton's stay, watching it fly away with a mixture of pride and sadness. "You did good," Dalton said, standing beside her on the porch as they watched the bird disappear into the sky. "I always worry they will not make it," Belinda admitted. "That I will release them too soon and they will not survive. But you have to let them go eventually," Dalton said. "Keeping them safe forever would not be living. It would just be another kind of cage." She looked at him sharply, wondering if he was talking about more than birds. His expression was thoughtful, his gaze distant. "You think about leaving?" she asked. "When the fence is done, when the work is finished." Dalton turned to face her fully. Honestly, I have not thought beyond the next fence post. For the first time in 3 years, I am not thinking about moving on. I am just thinking about being here. Belinda's heart did something complicated in her chest, a flutter like bird wings. I am glad you are here, she said quietly. So am I, Dalton replied, and the way he looked at her made her feel seen in a way she had not felt since her father died. Maybe longer. That night, a storm rolled in from the west, the kind of violent summer storm that turned the desert into a churning sea of wind and dust. Belinda woke to thunder and the sound of something banging against the house. She pulled on her robe and hurried to investigate, finding a shutter had come loose and was slamming repeatedly against the wall. She was struggling to secure it when Dalton appeared beside her, soaked from rain despite the short run from the barn. "Let me," he shouted over the wind. Together they fought the shutter back into place, Dalton's strength and height making the task manageable. By the time they finished, they were both drenched and breathing hard. Lightning illuminated the sky, and in its brief flash, Belinda saw Dalton's face, saw the way he was looking at her. "You should come inside," she said. "You will catch your death out here." "Your reputation," he started to protest. "There is no one around for miles to care about my reputation," Belinda said firmly. "And I care more about you not getting pneumonia. Come inside and dry off." In the kitchen, she handed him a towel and started a fire in the stove to chase away the chill the storm had brought. Dalton dried his hair, making it stand up in all directions, and Belinda found herself wanting to smooth it down. "Coffee," she offered instead. "That would be good," he said. They sat at the kitchen table as the storm raged outside, drinking coffee and listening to the rain hammer the roof. Cotton hopped around the kitchen, fully recovered now and full of energy despite the late hour. "I should probably build a proper hutch for that rabbit," Dalton said, watching Cotton investigate his boots. "Cannot keep it in a box forever." "I was thinking I might keep it," Belinda admitted. "I know that is silly. It is a wild rabbit and I should release it like the birds." "I do not think it is silly," Dalton said. "Sometimes we need company, even if it is just a rabbit." "Or a cowboy fixing fences," Belinda said before she could stop herself. Dalton's eyes found hers across the table. "I have been meaning to talk to you about that," he said slowly. "About what happens when the fence is done." Belinda's heart was suddenly pounding. "What about it?" "I do not want to leave," Dalton said simply. "I like it here. I like the work, I like the land, he paused, seeming to gather courage. "I like you, Belinda. More than I probably should after just a week." "A week can be a long time," Belinda said softly, "when it is the right week, the right person." "So you feel it too?" Dalton asked, leaning forward. "This connection between us?" "Yes," Belinda admitted. "I feel it." "Then let me stay," Dalton said. "Not just as a hired hand. Let me help you run this place properly. We could be partners." "Partners," Belinda repeated, testing the word. "To start," Dalton said, his eyes intense on hers. "And maybe more if you are willing. I know it is fast. I know we have not known each other long, but I have never felt like this before. Like I have found where I am supposed to be." Belinda thought about the long, lonely months since her father's death. Thought about the injured birds and the broken fence and the overwhelming weight of trying to survive alone. And then she thought about the past week, about shared meals and quiet conversations, and the warmth of knowing someone else was near. About Dalton's gentle hands helping with a baby rabbit, his strong back mending what was broken, his kind eyes seeing her as more than just a lonely woman on a failing homestead. "I would like that," she said. "I would like you to stay, as a partner, and maybe more." Dalton's smile was like sunrise after a long night. He reached across the table and took her hand, his palm warm and calloused against hers. "Then I will stay." The storm passed, leaving the world fresh and clean. They talked until dawn, making plans for the homestead for the future. Dalton told her about his ideas for expanding the cattle operation, for fixing up the barn and maybe adding some chickens. Belinda shared her dream of one day having a real garden, something beautiful as well as practical, with flowers as well as vegetables. When the sun finally rose, they walked out onto the porch together and watched the light spread across the land. Belinda's hand was still in Dalton's, and it felt natural there, like it belonged. Over the following weeks, the homestead transformed. Dalton finished the fence, working his way methodically around the entire property until every post was solid and every wire was taut. Then he moved on to the barn, replacing the broken door and reinforcing the walls. He patched the leaking roof and fixed the well pump and built a proper hutch for Cotton, who had indeed become a permanent resident. But more than the physical improvements, there was a change in the atmosphere of the place. It no longer felt abandoned or desperate. It felt lived in, cared for, loved. Belinda found herself humming as she worked in the garden, found herself looking forward to meals and evenings spent on the porch talking with Dalton. They were proper about things, mindful of both reputation and propriety. Dalton continued to sleep in the barn, and they were never alone together in the house after dark, unless the door was open. But the attraction between them grew stronger every day, manifesting in lingering glances and accidental touches that felt electric. One afternoon in late August, Belinda was in the garden when she heard an unfamiliar sound. Looking up, she saw a wagon approaching. As it drew closer, she recognized the driver as Mrs. Morrison from the general store, accompanied by two other women from Casa Grande. Belinda wiped her hands on her apron and went to greet them, wondering what had brought them all the way out to her homestead. "Miss Lawson," Mrs. Morrison called out cheerfully, "we thought it was time we paid you a proper visit." The women climbed down from the wagon, bringing with them baskets that smelled of fresh bread and pie. Belinda invited them onto the porch, bringing out lemonade and trying not to feel self-conscious about her dusty dress and tangled hair. "We have been hearing about your young man, Mrs. Morrison said with a knowing smile. "Mr. Morrison said he sent him out here, and the whole town has been wondering how you two are getting along." "Dalton is not my young man," Belinda said automatically, then felt her cheeks flush. "He is helping with the homestead." "Of course he is, dear," said Mrs. Patterson, the banker's wife, her tone suggesting she did not believe that for a second. "And doing a fine job from what we hear. The fence line looks excellent." "He is very skilled," Belinda admitted. "And handsome too, I would wager," added Miss Fletcher, the schoolteacher, who was young and romantic and always looking for love stories. Before Belinda could respond, Dalton came around the corner of the house, carrying a load of fresh-cut wood for the stove. He stopped short when he saw the visitors, then approached with his hat respectfully in his hands. "Ladies," he said with a polite nod. The women examined him with the frank assessment of those who took the social welfare of their community seriously. Belinda could see them noting his honest face, his respectful demeanor, his obviously hard-working nature. "Mr. Jenkins," Mrs. Morrison said warmly, "how nice to finally meet you properly. You have been the talk of the town, you know." Dalton looked uncomfortable but managed a smile. "Nothing bad, I hope." "Nothing bad at all," Mrs. Patterson assured him. "Just natural curiosity about the young man helping our Miss Lawson." They stayed for an hour, chatting about town gossip and upcoming harvest celebrations. Before they left, Mrs. Morrison pulled Belinda aside. "That is a good man," she said quietly. "My husband has a sense about these things, and he was right to send Mr. Jenkins your way. Do not let propriety or fear keep you from happiness, dear. Life is too short, and the frontier is too hard to face alone when you do not have to. After they left, Belinda found Dalton in the barn brushing down his horse. "I am sorry about that," she said. "Small-town curiosity can be overwhelming." "They care about you," Dalton said. "That is good. Means you have people looking out for you." "They seem to approve of you," Belinda said, moving closer. "Is that important to you? Their approval?" Belinda considered this. "I suppose it is, a little. These people knew my parents helped us when times were hard. Their opinion matters." "And what about your opinion?" Dalton asked, setting down the brush and turning to face her fully. "Does that matter too? My opinion is that you are the best thing to happen to this homestead in a long time," Belinda said honestly. "Maybe the best thing to happen to me in a long time." Dalton closed the distance between them in 2 steps. He raised his hand slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently brushed a strand of hair back from her face. "I am falling in love with you, Belinda Lawson," he said quietly. "I know it is fast, I know we should probably wait longer, but that is the truth of it." "Then we are both falling," Belinda whispered, "because I feel the same way." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. It was Belinda's first real kiss, and it felt like everything she had read about in the romance novels she snuck from the lending library. Her heart raced, her skin felt too warm, and when they finally pulled apart, she felt dizzy with happiness. "We should probably talk about the future," Dalton said, his hand still cupping her face. "About what this means, what we want." "I want you to stay," Belinda said. "Not just for the work, not just as a partner. I want you to stay because I cannot imagine this place without you anymore." "Then I am not going anywhere," Dalton promised. "But Belinda, I want to do this right. I want to court you properly, want to marry you if you will have me, want to build a life here together." "Yes," Belinda said simply. "Yes to all of it." They were married 6 weeks later in the small church in Casa Grande. Mrs. Morrison helped Belinda make a dress from cream-colored fabric ordered special from Tucson. The whole town turned out for the wedding, curious and approving in equal measure. Belinda carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Dalton had picked that morning, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was chaste but full of promise. The homestead became theirs in truth, not just in name. They worked side by side, Dalton handling the heavy labor while Belinda managed the house and garden and continued her rescue work with injured animals. Cotton the rabbit was joined by more birds, the occasional injured coyote pup, once even a young fox with a broken leg. Their first winter together was hard but manageable. They had prepared well, putting up food and securing the buildings against the cold. They spent long evenings by the fire, Belinda often sewing or knitting while Dalton carved small wooden figures or repaired tools. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's thoughts and dreams and fears. In the spring, Belinda discovered she was pregnant. She told Dalton one morning at breakfast, watching his face carefully for his reaction. For a moment he just stared at her, and then a smile spread across his face that was brighter than the sunrise. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Belinda asked, suddenly nervous. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Dalton said, coming around the table to pull her into his arms. "You have given me everything, Belinda. A home, a purpose, love, and now a family. I am the luckiest man in Arizona." The pregnancy was difficult at times. The summer heat was oppressive, and Belinda found herself tired more often than not. But Dalton was endlessly patient, taking on more of her chores without complaint, bringing her water and cool cloths when the heat became too much. In October, as the weather finally began to cool, their son was born. They named him Thomas, after Belinda's father, and he came into the world with strong lungs and his father's dark eyes. Dalton held him with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face, and whispered promises to always protect him, always love him, always be there. The first year of Thomas's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and exhausted days, but also moments of pure joy. His first smile, his first laugh, the way his eyes would light up when Dalton came in from the fields. Belinda had never known she could love so deeply, so completely. The homestead prospered. Word had spread about Dalton's skill with fence work and general repairs, and neighboring ranchers began hiring him for jobs. The extra income allowed them to expand, to buy more cattle, to improve the house. They added a proper bedroom for Thomas, and Dalton built Belinda a greenhouse where she could keep her injured birds warm through the winter. On Thomas's second birthday, Belinda discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the news came with less surprise, but no less joy. Their daughter, Emily, was born the following spring. A tiny thing with blonde hair like her mother and a disposition as calm as still water. The years rolled on, each one bringing new challenges and new blessings. A drought tested them one year, and they survived by careful management and the help of neighbors. A particularly harsh winter another year killed some of their cattle, but they rebuilt the herd. Through it all, their love for each other only deepened, rooted in shared work and shared dreams and the everyday intimacy of a life built together. Thomas grew into a serious boy who loved the land as much as his father did. At 8 years old, he was already helping with the cattle, riding his pony alongside Dalton's horse. Emily was more like her mother, gentle and nurturing, already rescuing every injured creature she found and bringing them to Belinda for help. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Dalton surprised Belinda with a trip to Tucson. It was the first time they had left the homestead for more than a day since they married, and Mrs. Morrison had agreed to watch Thomas and Emily. In Tucson, they stayed at a real hotel, ate at a restaurant, and walked the streets arm in arm like young lovers. "You ever regret it?" Dalton asked one evening as they sat on the hotel balcony watching the sunset, taking a chance on a stranger who rode up looking for work. Belinda leaned her head on his shoulder. "Not for a single second. You mended more than my fence, Dalton. You mended my whole life." "You did the same for me," he said, kissing the top of her head. "I was lost before I found you, just drifting, trying to outrun grief and loneliness. You gave me a reason to stay still, to put down roots, to live instead of just exist." "We saved each other," Belinda said softly. "Yes," Dalton agreed. "I think we did." They returned home to find the children well and the homestead running smoothly. Thomas tackled Dalton with a fierce hug, telling him all about a new calf that had been born while they were gone. Emily showed Belinda a bird's nest she had been watching, excited about the eggs that were starting to hatch. Life continued in its rhythm. More children came, 2 more sons and another daughter, until their home was filled with noise and laughter and the constant motion of a large family. The homestead expanded to include more land, purchased from a neighbor who was retiring. Dalton built a larger barn and a proper bunkhouse for the ranch hands they eventually hired. But through all the changes and growth, some things remained constant. Every morning, Belinda still checked the windows for injured birds, her apron always ready to serve as a rescue basket. And every day, Dalton found something to mend, to fix, to improve, his hands always busy caring for the land and the family they had built together. On their 25th anniversary, their children threw them a celebration. Thomas, now 23 and married himself, had taken over much of the day-to-day running of the ranch. Emily, at 21, was engaged to a young lawyer from Casa Grande. The younger children, ranging from 19 down to 13, had all contributed to decorating the house and preparing food. As Belinda looked around at her family, at the home they had built, at the land that had tested them and shaped them and ultimately blessed them, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. The lonely woman who had rescued injured birds in her apron was gone, replaced by a wife, a mother, a partner in every sense of the word. That night, after the guests had left and the children had finally gone to bed, Belinda and Dalton sat on their porch, the same porch where they had shared their first meal together all those years ago. "You remember that first day?" Belinda asked. "When you rode up asking for work?" "I remember thinking you were the prettiest woman I had ever seen," Dalton said, "even with dirt on your cheek and a bird in your apron." "I remember thinking I should send you away," Belinda admitted. "I was scared to trust a stranger, scared to hope that things could get better." "I am glad you did not send me away," Dalton said, taking her hand. "So am I," Belinda said. "You know what I think sometimes? I think about all those birds I rescued over the years, how I would mend their broken wings and release them back into the sky. And I think maybe I needed to be rescued too. Maybe we both did." "And who rescued who?" Dalton asked with a smile. "I think we rescued each other," Belinda said, echoing the words from their anniversary trip so many years ago. "You mended my fence, but I think I mended your heart. And you mended mine." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out one by one. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. From the barn came the soft sounds of horses settling for the night. In the house behind them, their children slept, safe and warm and loved. "It has been a good life," Dalton said eventually. "It has been a wonderful life," Belinda corrected. "And it is not over yet. We have grandchildren to meet, more birds to rescue, more fences to mend." "Always more fences to mend," Dalton agreed with a laugh. "That is the nature of ranch life." "That is the nature of any life," Belinda said wisely. "Things break and we mend them. We get hurt and we heal. We get lonely, and if we are very lucky, we find someone who fills that emptiness with love." "I love you, Belinda Jenkins," Dalton said, using her married name with the same pleasure he always had. "I have loved you since the day I saw you cradling that dove in your apron. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Belinda replied. "My cowboy who mended my fence and my loneliness and my broken heart." The years continued to pass, bringing the joys and sorrows that come with a life fully lived. They became grandparents multiple times over, their home often filled with the laughter and chaos of visiting grandchildren. Thomas and his wife took over the ranch completely when Dalton turned 55, allowing him and Belinda to slow down, to enjoy the fruits of their decades of hard work. Belinda never stopped rescuing injured birds. Even in her 60s, she could be found with her apron full of small, wounded creatures, her hands gentle and sure as she mended broken wings and nursed the hurt back to health. The greenhouse Dalton had built her became a sanctuary, known throughout the territory as a place where injured wildlife could find help. Dalton remained active, unable to fully retire even when his children begged him to rest more. He built furniture for his grandchildren, maintained the fences that had started it all, and spent long afternoons teaching his grandsons the skills his own father had taught him. On their 40th anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and friends from all over Arizona, Belinda stood to make a toast. Her hair was silver now, her hands marked by years of work, but her eyes were as bright as they had been at 23. 40 years ago," she said, her voice carrying across the crowded room, "I was alone on a failing homestead, trying to rescue injured birds because it was the only thing that made me feel less lonely. And then a cowboy rode up looking for work, and he changed everything. He mended my fence, yes, but more importantly, he mended my loneliness. He gave me a partner, a love, a life beyond anything I had dreamed possible. So here is to Dalton, who saw a lonely woman and decided to stay, who took a chance on a future neither of us could predict, who has been my best friend, my lover, my partner in all things for 40 wonderful years. Dalton stood, his own eyes bright with tears, and pulled her into his arms. "And here is to Belinda," he said, "who taught me that home is not a place but a person, who showed me that the greatest adventure is not in running from grief, but in building a life full of love, who gave me everything I never knew I needed." They kissed to the cheers and applause of their family, and in that moment, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built together, both of them felt the profound rightness of the path they had chosen all those years ago. As they grew older still, they settled into a gentle routine. Mornings on the porch with coffee, watching the sun rise over land that had tested them and shaped them. Afternoons spent in the garden or the greenhouse, working side by side as they always had. Evenings with family or quietly alone, content in each other's company. When Belinda was 71, she found a hawk with a badly broken wing. The bird was fierce and frightened, lashing out at her attempts to help. But Belinda was patient, as she had always been, and gradually the hawk calmed enough for her to splint the wing and begin the long process of healing. Dalton built the hawk a special enclosure in the greenhouse, large enough for it to move but secure enough to keep it safe. Every day, Belinda tended to it, talking softly as she changed bandages and encouraged it to eat. And slowly, over weeks and then months, the hawk healed. On the day they released it, 3 generations of family gathered to watch. The hawk perched on Belinda's gloved hand, its wing fully healed, its eyes bright and wild. For a moment, it simply sat there, as if reluctant to leave the woman who had saved it. Then, with a powerful thrust of its wings, it launched into the sky, circling once above the gathered family before flying off toward the mountains. "You did good, Grandma," Thomas said, his arm around his own teenage son. "She always does," Dalton said, his hand finding Belinda's and squeezing gently. That night, lying in the bed they had shared for more than 4 decades, Belinda turned to Dalton. "Do you ever think about that first day?" she asked. "Do you ever wonder how different life would be if you had ridden past, if you had gone to a different homestead?" "Never," Dalton said firmly. "I do not believe in that kind of chance. I think I was meant to find you, meant to stop here, meant to build this life with you. Some things are just destined." "I like that," Belinda said softly. "The idea that we were always meant to find each other." "2 lonely souls who needed rescuing," Dalton said, "just like your birds." "Except we rescued each other," Belinda said, "and we flew together instead of apart." They drifted off to sleep, comfortable and warm, hands still clasped beneath the quilts Belinda had sewn over the years. Outside, the night was peaceful, the land quiet and content. The fences stood strong, the buildings were sound, and the greenhouse sheltered the next generation of healing creatures. Their final years were gentle ones, full of grandchildren and great-grandchildren, of quiet mornings and peaceful evenings. They celebrated their 50th anniversary with a party that brought people from all over the territory, all come to honor the couple whose love story had become legendary in Casa Grande. When Dalton passed away at the age of 78, it was peacefully in his sleep, with Belinda beside him. She held his hand as he took his last breath, and though her heart broke, there was also gratitude. Gratitude for the 52 years they had shared, for the love that had sustained them through joy and sorrow, for the life they had built from broken fences and injured birds and 2 lonely hearts that found each other. Belinda lived 2 more years, surrounded by family, still rescuing the occasional injured bird until the very end. On the morning she died, at 80 years old, she was found in her greenhouse with a sparrow cradled gently in her apron. The bird was fine, already healed, and it flew away when her grandson Thomas gently removed it from her still hands. They buried her next to Dalton on a hill overlooking the homestead, under the shade of a cottonwood tree they had planted together in their first year of marriage. The whole town came to the funeral, and people spoke of her kindness, her strength, her unwavering compassion for all wounded things. But it was Thomas who gave the eulogy that captured the truth of his mother's life. Standing before the gathered crowd, his own hair now streaked with gray, he spoke of a woman who had been alone and afraid, who had filled her apron with injured birds because caring for them helped her survive her own loneliness. He spoke of the cowboy who had ridden up one summer day and seen not just a woman who needed help with a fence, but a soul who needed connection. And he spoke of the love that had grown between them, a love that had built not just a homestead but a legacy. My mother used to say that everything broken can be mended if you are patient enough and care enough, Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. She proved that with every bird she healed, with every fence my father repaired, with the life they built together. They started with nothing but loneliness and a broken fence, and they created this. He gestured to the assembled crowd, to the thriving ranch spreading out below them, to the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who were the living proof of that first brave choice to let a stranger stay. After the funeral, the family gathered at the main house, now expanded and modernized but still recognizably the same structure where it had all begun. Thomas's son, who had inherited Belinda's gift with injured animals, stood at the window where the first dove had crashed all those years ago. In his hands, he held a small bird, a finch with a damaged wing. "I will take care of it," he said softly, as if making a promise to the grandmother who had taught him that compassion was not weakness but the greatest strength of all. And on the eastern boundary, where Dalton had first begun mending fences more than 50 years ago, the posts still stood strong, replaced over the years, but always maintained with the same care and attention he had brought to that first day of work. The fence stood as a monument to a simple act of kindness that had changed 2 lives completely. In the years that followed, the story of Belinda and Dalton became part of the fabric of Casa Grande. Young couples would visit their graves, hoping some of that legendary love would bless their own unions. The greenhouse was maintained as Belinda would have wanted, continuing to serve as a refuge for injured wildlife. And the ranch continued to prosper under Thomas's stewardship, and eventually his sons, each generation honoring the foundation that had been laid by a lonely woman with birds in her apron, and a cowboy who had stopped to mend a fence and ended up mending so much more. The town itself grew and changed with the times, but some stories remained constant. On quiet evenings, old-timers would gather at the general store and tell the tale of Belinda Lawson and Dalton Jenkins, of how they found each other against all odds, of how they built a love that lasted a lifetime and a legacy that lasted even longer. And sometimes, on summer mornings when the light hit just right, people swore they could see 2 figures on the old porch of the original homestead, now carefully preserved by the family. A woman with an apron and a man with gentle hands, sitting together and watching the sunrise over the land they had loved and tended and shared. Just a trick of the light, surely, but a pleasant thought nonetheless, because some love stories do not end with death. They continue in the land that was tended, in the children who were raised, in the fences that were mended and the birds that were healed. They continue in the memory of a community that witnessed them, in the example they set, in the proof they provided that loneliness can be transformed into love if two people are brave enough to take the chance. Belinda had been rescuing injured birds in her apron, each one a small act of defiance against the crushing loneliness that had threatened to consume her. And then a cowboy had ridden up, had seen what needed mending, and had stayed to fix not just the fence, but the broken heart of a woman who had forgotten what it felt like to hope. Their story was simple in its elements, but profound in its impact. It was a reminder that sometimes the greatest love stories start not with grand gestures but with small acts of service. A fence mended, a bird rescued, a meal shared, a conversation that stretched into the night, moments that built upon each other until they became a life, a love, a legacy. In the end, that was what they left behind. Not just property or possessions, but proof that two people who choose each other, who commit to building something together, who face the challenges of life side by side, can create something that outlasts them both. Something that continues to inspire and guide and give hope to all who hear their story. The fence stood strong. The birds flew free. The land prospered. And the love of Belinda and Dalton lived on in every person who heard their tale and dared to believe that they too might find someone who would mend not just their fences but their loneliness, their broken places, their wounded hearts. That was the gift they gave to Casa Grande and to everyone who came after them. The knowledge that rescue comes in many forms, that love can grow in the hardest soil, and that sometimes the greatest adventure is not in leaving home but in building one, brick by brick, fence post by fence post, rescued bird by rescued bird, until loneliness becomes belonging and two separate lives become one shared journey. And in that, they had succeeded beyond measure.